Hello and welcome to another video on the very basics of Vue. Today we're going to be going over loops, conditional rendering and functions in order to make a site a bit more dynamic. Very quickly I'm going to show you what we're going to be making. Here's one I made earlier. What we have here is we have 3 divs, each of which is dynamically generated because we've got an array of messages here. And we're looping over each message to pop this on the page. When we click on one of these, we're emitting a function which deletes it from the array. And then when the array is empty, we get this message that says no messages. So how are we going to make that? We'll go over a bit of theory first, just to get everyone up to speed. To recap what we did last time, we covered that Vue is a JavaScript framework primarily used to make single-page applications and progressive web apps. JavaScript injects components into a single element on the page, and to pass data from a parent to a child component, you need to use props. First off, more on props. There are 2 ways of writing props. There's the quick way, as we did before, and the type-safe way. Making variables type-safe helps to ensure that there are fewer bugs in your code. If you pass data as props in the wrong format, the code won't compile. This means that more type-related errors are caught at compile time rather than at runtime. So what we had before is we just had our props defined as an array of strings, and we can have as many of these as we want. Even if they're not of string type, we define them like this. The better way of doing it is you have props and a message. This is actually written wrong. You need to create a JavaScript object, and we have to say type : string. Like this. What this is we've got a message with a type of string. You can also give default values to our props. So if for whatever reason this component doesn't receive the message prop, the message's default value will be displayed, which is just default message in this case. You can also pass data as other types. So in this case we've got an object which contains 2 parameters here. And of course you can make these parameters type safe as well. Next up, conditional rendering. There are 2 main ways to conditionally render content on a page with Vue: using the content's display property or just loading and unloading content. If we go to the example that we're going to be making here, how this is changing from these to this is we've got an if-else statement which is written like vif and velse. What this means is if the condition is met, then the vif part will display, and if the condition is not met, we use velse. The alternative to that is using vshow, where if the condition is not met, then the display property of something it just hides it, so it gives it the style of display none. And if the condition is true, for example, it will display it as block. And there it is on the page. There are benefits and downsides to each of these. The benefit of using vif and velse is that it lazily loads content on the page, meaning that when you first navigate to that page, not everything will be loaded into the view, so it will load a lot quicker. The downside to vif and velse is that if you're constantly, so if we look over here, when we click on one of these, I've used vif and velse here, it actually disappears from the DOM. This can be very expensive, so if you're going to be modifying the DOM with conditional rendering a lot, it's much better to use vshow, because vshow is just changing the CSS of a thing, which is a lot less resource intensive and it's a lot quicker. The downside to vshow is that everything is put on the page into the DOM on the page load. So if you've got a lot of stuff on your page and a lot of it's hidden because a lot of vshow conditions aren't met, then your page will load a lot slower than if you used vif and velse. So it depends what your use case is. Next up, loops. This is an example of a loop. It's essentially just a normal programming for loop. we've got an array here called messages. For every message in messages, we're going to, in this case, create a paragraph and binding the message as a prop to here. The thing about messages, the thing about for loops, in Vue, is that each element in the for loop needs a unique key. So in this case, the message ID is unique, and we're binding that to the property. It's not something that you can reference. It's not something that you personally use, but Vue needs it behind the scenes. Basically, when you click on, when you modify any element in a for loop, if it doesn't have a unique key, then Vue doesn't know which one you've clicked on. If you have two things with a key of 2 or 3, for example, and you want to delete one of them, then Vue won't know which one you're referring to, and it will produce unexpected results. Finally, very quickly, we got methods in Vue. This is basically just functions, methods, whatever. You put it in the export default part of your script, part of your .vue file, and you define it like this. You've got function name, any parameters it takes, and then what it does. So this one, if the array messages the length is 0, then the array is empty. It returns a boolean, either true or false. And any methods you want to define, you just comma separate them here, and put them down here. So, how do we turn what we made before into this? First off, let's just check out what we had before. We got this is a message, this is another message. This is defined because we've got some data in here that's just statically defined. First off, though, before we jump into that, we need to make the props type safe inside the paragraph. So if you remember, what we want to do is we've got the message, we're going to give it a type of string, and that is that. Renders absolutely fine. You can also give something a default value. So just define it like this. And then if we take out the message of one of these, we get default text here. Nice and simple. But we're not going to be doing that. So next up, we're going to be making a for loop. First off, we want to make our array of stuff. We want to put a colon here. It's just going to be an array of objects which have an ID. I'm just going to hard code IDs here, but you could use the database object ID if you're fetching something from Mongo, for example, or you can use date.now if you just want to be quickly giving unique IDs. Because these are going to be created pretty much at the same time, that might not work for our case. So we'll just give it a standard thing. And then we're going to give it some text, which is, in our case, going to be para1. And then we're going to create 3 of these. And then 3. Cool, so we got our array of messages. Currently saying default text because these things don't make sense. Next up, we're going to be creating our for loop. So what we want is we want a div with v for every message in messages. We want to create a paragraph, and we're going to v-bind the message that it takes as a prop. And we're going to do it like that. You can shorthand this. So what's happening here is we've not given each one of these paragraphs here a unique key. What we want to do that is very simply v-bind key equals message.id. Then if that loads, we're printing 3 things onto the page. What's happening here is now we've changed each message to be an object. We'll want to change this type object, get rid of the default, and we want to give it message.text. There we go. Power 1, power 2, power 3. Next up, conditional rendering. So what we're going to do is check if the messages array is empty or not. And if it is, we want to display there are no more messages or something like that. So I'm going to div with v if messages.length is 0. No messages. And then we can just put a v else directly on here. So messages length is not 0. We've got 3 powers. If we just get rid of this, say no messages. Finally, what we want to do is if you click on the message, we want to delete it, basically. We want to delete it. And to do that, we are going to add an emit to this here. And what that will do essentially is when it's clicked, it will emit a function up to the parent, and then the parent will do something as a result of that emit. It's basically sending a message saying, hey, do something, please. So what we want to do is @click. So when you click it, we want to emit. We're going to give our emit a name. In this case, it will just be del. And then the message ID, because we want to pass up something unique so we know which message we're going to delete. We'll save this and go to our View tab and look here. We're emitting this del message. Del doesn't currently do anything because we've not defined the function in our parent, but it is emitting the event del. Now, if we want that del to do something, we'll want to have v on. So when we hear the del message, we're going to do something which we're going to call delete me. And close that off. And down here under our data, which closes here, we're going to define our methods. Very quickly, we're just going to put delete me, takes an ID, that's wrong, takes an ID, and what we're basically going to do is this.messages equals this.messages dot filter, where the message.id is not equal to the ID that we've just passed in. There we go. And we're now filtering out everything. It was nice and easy, wasn't it? Obviously, this is very powerful. If we have a look here, we are actually getting rid of elements on the page and then showing this no messages thing. From here, basically, you can make your web apps. You can make a single page application with the idea of props, data, conditional rendering, loops, functions. That's really all you need to create your first app. Next lesson, we're going to be creating a very basic to-do app. So you know the one, it's where you can add to-dos to a list, you can get rid of them, modify them maybe, We'll see. But thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, leave them down below. If you've got any suggestions, also, I'm very new to this, so leave them down below as well. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.